Lithonia man convicted of murder and shooting an officer will spend the rest of his life behind bars, we've learned. Otis Walker has been sentenced to life plus 65 years for killing his girlfriend, Alica Simmons. Now, he also fired at officers as they responded. This happened inside a home in Lithonia in 2019. Jurors found Walker guilty of multiple charges, including felony murder and 3 counts of aggravated assault of a law enforcement officer.
It was 11:47 p.m. Friday, April 14, 2023, when the call came into DeKalb County Dispatch. The voice on the other end was panicked, trembling, and barely coherent. "There's blood everywhere, she's not moving." By the time paramedics arrived at the small apartment complex just off Covington Highway, the lights inside apartment 2B were still on. Music still played faintly from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner, a love song looping over and over, like the night refused to end. On the living room floor lay Alica Simmons, 27 years old. A mother. A daughter. A friend. She was the kind of woman who carried her struggles with quiet strength. She was working her way through life, raising her little boy, juggling bills, hustling between 2 jobs. She wanted something better. Something safer. But in her search for love, she found him. A man she once believed needed saving, the same man police say took everything from her. Neighbors reported hearing shouting around 11:30 p.m., something crashing, then silence. Minutes later, a man was seen running from the apartment barefoot, keys clutched in his hand. He didn't look back. When investigators pieced it together, the story that emerged was almost impossible to comprehend. Just weeks earlier, Alica had emptied her savings to bail him out of jail. She believed in second chances. She told her mother, "He just needs support, Ma. Everyone deserves one more shot." Those words would echo in the quiet courtroom months later, when prosecutors read them aloud. This isn't just a story about crime. It's about trust, misplaced, misused, and turned fatal. It's about how love can blind us to danger until it's too late. And it's about how one woman's kindness became her undoing. Over the next hour, we'll uncover the full story behind that April night. How a young mother's compassion met a man's chaos, how a relationship filled with promises turned into a scene that still haunts DeKalb County, and what this tragedy teaches us about love, control, and the choices that can't be undone. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Every click helps us keep these stories alive, stories that matter, stories that warn, stories that speak for those who can't anymore. And while you're here, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or state in the comments below. Because stories like Alica's don't just happen somewhere else, they happen in neighborhoods like yours, to people we all know. Thank you for being part of this growing community. Red Heart, your support means everything. By joining our channel membership, you help us continue producing thoughtful, factual documentaries that uncover the truth, honor victims, and give voice to stories that deserve to be remembered. Now, let's rewind the clock, back to the beginning. Before the flashing lights. Before the sirens. Back to when Alica Simmons still believed love could save him. Long before the flashing lights and crime scene tape, there was laughter, the kind that comes from people who believe they've finally found understanding in someone else. To those who knew her, Alica Simmons was light in human form. She was only 27, but her life had carried the weight of a woman twice her age. Growing up on the south side of Atlanta, she learned early that survival meant strength. She had a son, barely 5 years old, who was her world. Every plan she made, every extra shift she worked, every prayer she whispered at night, it was for him. By day, she cared for her boy and picked up hours at a local diner. By night, she worked at a small club under neon lights that hid the exhaustion behind her smile. People there knew her stage name, but her real life was far from glamorous. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing stability. Rent, daycare, groceries, it was all a balancing act. Yet even in that struggle, she still believed in love. That's when she met Marcus Reed, older, charming, the kind of man who could make a woman feel like the only one in the room. He had a story for every scar, a compliment for every insecurity, and a way of saying her name that made it sound like a promise. But behind that warmth was a man already at war with himself. Marcus had a record: arrests for assault, possession, petty theft. He'd done time. But he told Alicia he was ready to change. He said he just needed a reason, someone to believe in him. And Alicia, with her open heart and tired hope, became that reason. Her friends warned her. "He's got a past, girl." She brushed it off, saying, "Everyone's got a past. I just want his future to look better." The first months felt perfect. Flowers on her car. Surprise lunches at work. Long messages about how she was different from the rest. Alicia began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could rewrite both of their stories. But slowly, the tone shifted. He didn't like her working late. He questioned her friends, her phone, the way she dressed. Little comments turned into long nights of arguing. "You're supposed to be mine," he'd say, his voice trembling with something between love and control. When he got arrested again, this time for fighting outside a gas station, Alicia was devastated. Still, when he called from jail, his voice soft and desperate, she answered. He told her he'd learned his lesson. That jail was hell. That he just wanted to come home. "You're all I got, baby. Please." And she believed him. She used what little she had, her savings meant for her son's school clothes, and signed the bail papers that set him free. That decision, made out of love, faith, and exhaustion, would become the one moment that changed everything. As she waited for him outside the jail, watching those steel doors open, she smiled. Not knowing that the man she was saving would soon destroy the very life she was trying to build. When Marcus Reed walked out of DeKalb County Jail that spring afternoon, the air was thick with humidity and second chances. Alica Simmons stood waiting in a faded gray hoodie, clutching her keys like they were her last bit of control. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes soft with relief. For her, it wasn't just about love, it was about redemption. She believed that people could change, that love could turn brokenness into something worth saving. But within weeks of his release, the man she had sacrificed everything for began to change. The gratitude disappeared first. Then came the moods, the long silences that followed harmless questions, the temper that rose over nothing at all. He started showing up unannounced at her workplace, lurking in the back of the parking lot, his eyes scanning every car that pulled up. Her co-workers noticed. "Alicia, that your man again," they'd whisper as she wiped the counter, pretending not to hear. She'd force a smile and say, "Yeah, he's just protective." But inside, she knew something wasn't right. Arguments became routine. Small things, a message left unread, a shift that ran too late, turned into shouting matches. Marcus would storm out, only to return hours later with apologies that sounded like poetry. "I just love you too much," he'd say. "You make me crazy." It was the kind of confession that made her chest tighten. Was that love, or a warning she refused to see? Her friends stopped visiting. Calls from family went unanswered. Her mother, Alica Simmons, later told detectives that she had tried to intervene. "I told her, you can't fix a man who don't want to be fixed," she said through tears. But Alicia always defended him. She told her mother he was trying, that he just needed patience. Then came the financial strain. The bail had drained her savings, and Marcus wasn't working. He'd promised to get a job next week, but the weeks turned into months. Sometimes, he'd disappear for days, his phone going straight to voicemail. Other times, he'd show up at the club, uninvited, drunk, his jealousy boiling over when other men tipped her on stage. She'd ask him to leave quietly, afraid of a scene. The violence didn't start with fists, it started with words. "You don't love me," he'd say. "You think you're better than me." Every argument chipped away at her sense of peace. Every apology blurred the line between love and control. By August, friends noticed bruises she tried to hide under makeup. When asked, she laughed it off, "It's nothing." But her smile no longer reached her eyes. Her son began asking why Mommy and Marcus yell at night. And still, she stayed, hoping the man she fell in love with would come back. In her final texts to a friend, sent just weeks before her death, Alicia wrote, "He's been better lately. I think he's finally changing." She added a heart emoji at the end. It would be her last message before everything collapsed. No one knew that the man who once said he couldn't live without her would soon prove it in the most devastating way possible. It was late September 2023, and the first hint of autumn crept through Atlanta. Leaves began to fall across cracked sidewalks, and the nights grew quieter, except inside the small apartment Alicia shared with her son. The walls had started to feel like they were closing in. The laughter that once filled that space was replaced with tension so thick, even her 5-year-old could sense it. He would cover his ears when Marcus raised his voice. Sometimes, Alicia would tell him, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's just tired," even when her hands shook as she said it. After Marcus's release, things hadn't improved. He promised to stay out of trouble, to be a better man, but trouble seemed to follow him like a shadow. He started coming home later, carrying the smell of cheap liquor and cigarette smoke. When Alicia asked questions, he'd brush her off, "You don't trust me? After everything you've done for me?" His words carried guilt like a weapon, turning her compassion into her weakness. Then, one night, Marcus disappeared again. 3 days passed. No calls. No messages. Nothing. When he finally showed up, his knuckles were bruised, and his clothes smelled like gasoline. "You been fighting again?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He just stared at her, eyes cold, before collapsing on the couch. The next morning, a knock rattled the door. It was 2 officers with a warrant. Marcus had been involved in another altercation, this time, a violent one. Alicia stood frozen as they cuffed him in front of her son, his tiny voice echoing down the hallway, "Mommy, where's Marcus going?" She had no answer. For a brief moment, there was peace. The apartment felt lighter, calmer. But love, real or imagined, has a way of calling us back to pain. Just a few weeks later, Marcus began calling from jail again. Every night. He cried on the phone, told her he couldn't sleep, said he was cold, hungry, and alone. "You're the only one who ever believed in me, baby. Please. Don't leave me in here. I'll change, I swear to God." Alicia tried to resist. Her mother begged her not to answer the phone. Her best friend said, "You're giving a drowning man the power to pull you under." But one night, while folding her son's clothes and staring at the eviction notice on her counter, she broke. She drove to the bondsman's office and signed his release papers again. It cost nearly everything she had left. The next morning, she stood in the same parking lot she had once promised herself she'd never return to. When Marcus walked out, wearing that same orange jumpsuit and the same crooked smile, she felt relief mixed with fear. He hugged her tightly, too tightly, whispering, "I knew you'd come through. You always do." That evening, she texted her friend, "He's out. I hope I didn't make a mistake." The message went unread for hours. Because mistakes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes, they walk right back into your life, wearing the face of someone you thought you could save. It was Friday, April 14, 2023. The night started like any other, warm air drifting through half-open windows, the low hum of passing cars outside, the faint scent of rain still clinging to the pavement. Inside Alicia's apartment, a single lamp glowed in the corner, illuminating toys on the floor and an untouched dinner plate on the table. Her son had gone to bed early at his grandmother's house, leaving Alicia alone, or so she thought. At 10:43 p.m., Marcus's name lit up her phone. He'd been gone for hours, claiming to be with friends, but his tone was different now, sharp, accusing. "You think I don't know where you've been?" he hissed. She sighed, trying to steady her voice. "Marcus, I've been home. Please don't start tonight." But his reply came through clenched teeth, "Leave the door unlocked. I'm coming over." She sat there for a moment, heart pounding. Every instinct told her to lock that door. To call someone. To leave. But love, or the memory of it, held her still. She told herself he just needed to talk. Maybe they could fix things, one more time. By 11:15 p.m., neighbors would later recall hearing raised voices. It started as muffled arguing, then something heavier, the sound of a chair scraping, something hitting the wall. A neighbor in 2C told police she heard a woman crying, followed by a man shouting, "You made me do this." Inside, the argument had escalated fast. Marcus accused her of seeing someone else. She tried to calm him down, but his rage drowned out her words. He grabbed her phone, scrolling through messages that weren't there, his breathing ragged. "You think I'm stupid?" he yelled. She reached for the device, her voice trembling. "Marcus, please. You're scaring me." The next moments were chaos. Alicia stumbled backward as he shoved the table aside. The lamp fell, plunging half the room into darkness. The only light came from the kitchen, the cold white glare reflecting off a metal blade. Police reports would later state that the knife was taken from her own drawer. At 11:31 p.m., a neighbor heard a final crash and silence. Then footsteps. Fast. Heavy. The door slammed, and the hallway went still. When first responders arrived 12 minutes later, they found Alicia on the floor, surrounded by shards of glass and a pool of blood that had already begun to darken. Her phone lay inches from her hand, the screen still glowing, a half-typed message to her mother, "He's here. Please." Paramedics worked frantically, their voices steady but strained. "Stay with us, Alicia. Come on, stay with us." But her pulse was fading, her breath shallow. Marcus was gone. The front door was ajar, his footprints leading down the steps into the night. By the time police radioed in at 11:47 p.m., the crime scene was sealed. The song that had been playing in the background, soft, romantic, haunting, was still looping, over and over, as if the night refused to let her go. And somewhere out there, under the same Atlanta sky, the man she once saved was already running, away from her, from what he'd done, and from the second chance she gave him that he never deserved. By midnight, flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of the small DeKalb County apartment. Detectives stepped through the doorway with quiet precision, their radios murmuring updates in the background. The room was frozen in time, a half-finished glass of wine on the counter, a child's toy car near the couch, a single shoe left in the hallway. Everything was still, except for the steady hum of the ceiling fan circling above the tragedy. Detective Renee Porter, a 12-year veteran of the force, led the scene. She had seen violence before, but something about this one stopped her in her tracks. The young woman on the floor wasn't a stranger to struggle, she could see it in the framed pictures around the room, Alicia smiling with her son at a birthday party, laughing with friends at a cookout. Now, that same woman lay beneath a thin white sheet. "Looks like she fought back," one officer said quietly. He pointed to scratches on Marcus's mugshot photo found torn in half on the kitchen counter. But it was the details that told the story, a shattered lamp base near the table, a knife handle wiped clean of prints, and the faint smell of bleach. Marcus had tried to erase himself from the room, but his mistakes lingered in the silence. As evidence technicians photographed the scene, Porter's attention shifted to Alicia's phone. The screen was cracked, but still unlocked, a thread of messages showing hours of pleading texts from Marcus, "Answer me. Why are you ignoring me?" followed by, "If I can't have you, nobody will." The last message from Alicia, timestamped 11:29 p.m., read simply, "Marcus, stop." By dawn, detectives were already tracing his last known movements. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed Marcus less than an hour before the murder, pacing outside, talking on the phone, agitated. Witnesses recalled him storming off toward the apartment complex. He looked angry, the clerk said. Like he was ready to fight a ghost. 2 days later, police found his car abandoned behind an old warehouse off Memorial Drive. Inside were Alicia's earrings, a stained hoodie, and a gas receipt from earlier that night. But the real break came when a friend of Marcus came forward, claiming he had shown up at his place after midnight, hands shaking, muttering, "I messed up bad, bro." She wouldn't stop screaming. When detectives brought him in, Marcus denied everything. He said he just wanted to talk, that she was fine when he left. But as they read his messages aloud, his confidence cracked. "I didn't mean to," he started, before going silent. Outside the precinct, Alicia's family gathered for a press conference. Her mother, Angela, held a photo of her daughter and said, through tears, she saved him. She gave him everything. And this is how he repaid her. The community watched, hearts broken but not surprised. Because stories like Alicia's, stories of women trying to love men through their pain, were far too common. Detective Porter stood on the sidelines that day, the sun glaring against her badge. She'd later say that what haunted her most wasn't the scene itself, it was that text message glowing on Alicia's screen. 2 words that told the entire story. "Marcus, stop." The morning after the murder, April 15, 2023, dawned cold and gray. Rain began to fall softly across DeKalb County, washing over the cracked pavement outside Alicia's apartment complex. By mid-morning, yellow tape still fluttered in the wind, and a small crowd of neighbors stood huddled together, whispering prayers. But inside the Simmons family home, a different kind of storm was unfolding, one that no weather could ever calm. When Angela Simmons got the call from police just after sunrise, she dropped the phone. Her scream echoed through the house, waking Alicia's little boy, who came running down the hallway rubbing his eyes. "Grandma, what's wrong?" he asked. She couldn't answer. How do you tell a 5-year-old that his world just disappeared? She pulled him close, burying her face in his hair, whispering, "Mommy's resting now, baby." At the police station, Marcus Reed sat in an interrogation room, his wrists cuffed, his face blank. Hours had passed since his arrest. The adrenaline was gone, only silence remained. Detectives asked questions he barely seemed to hear. "Did you intend to hurt her, Marcus? Why did you go there that night?" He rubbed his hands together, muttering, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." But his voice wavered with guilt. "She just kept saying she was done with me. I couldn't take it no more." He lifted his head, his eyes hollow. "She was supposed to love me." Those words would later be quoted in court. They weren't an excuse, they were an admission. The moment Marcus realized love wasn't something you could own, he destroyed the only person who ever believed he could change. As the story broke across Atlanta news stations, reporters replayed the same photo, Alicia smiling, her son in her lap, a life full of promise now turned into a headline. Vigils formed that evening, candles flickering in the rain. Friends and co-workers gathered outside the club where she used to work, placing roses at the entrance. One co-worker said softly to the camera, she was trying to build a future. She didn't deserve this. Angela attended the vigil wrapped in her daughter's favorite denim jacket, clutching her phone where she'd saved Alicia's last text, "Mom, I'm okay. Just tired." It was sent 3 hours before the murder. The pain was unbearable. She told reporters that she had warned Alicia, begged her to let him go. But she had a heart too big for her own good, Angela said, tears sliding down her cheeks. She thought love could fix him. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in county lockup, awaiting formal charges. Inmates later told guards they'd heard him crying at night, whispering Alicia's name. One said he'd seen Marcus staring at his hands for hours, mumbling, "I just wanted her to listen." But it was too late. The listening was over. The forgiveness he wanted died with her. Back at the Simmons home, Alicia's son asked his grandmother again that night, "When's Mommy coming back?" Angela turned off the light, clutching him close, whispering through her tears, "She's with the angels now, baby. She's with the angels." And in the quiet that followed, the reality settled in. Love hadn't saved Alica Simmons. It had trapped her. And in the end, it had cost her everything. When the courtroom doors opened on June 19, 2023, the air felt heavy, as if the building itself knew the weight of what was about to unfold. Marcus Reed entered in a wrinkled orange jumpsuit, wrists bound, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Alicia's family. He just stared at the floor, like if he avoided their gaze, he could avoid the truth. The prosecution called it what it was: obsession, control, and possessive rage disguised as love. But psychologists called it something else: trauma bonding. A cycle of love, abuse, and guilt so entangled that even the victim can't see where affection ends and fear begins. Experts testified that men like Marcus often crave power more than partnership. They don't want love, they want ownership. They create dependency through fear and then justify violence as proof of devotion. For Marcus, every "I love you" was really an anchor, pulling Alicia deeper into a relationship she couldn't escape. But the most chilling revelation came from Marcus's own words, recovered from a jailhouse phone recording just days before the murder. His voice, low and bitter, filled the courtroom. "She forgets who had her back when nobody else did. She thinks she can walk away from me. She got another thing coming." Gasps rippled through the room. Alica Simmons buried her face in her hands. For her, this wasn't psychology, it was reality. It was the echo of every night she'd begged her daughter to leave him, and every time Alicia had said, "He's not that bad, Mom. He just gets angry sometimes." Investigators pieced together Marcus's mindset in the weeks leading up to the killing. He had lost his job. His parole officer had issued a warning. Friends said he was spiraling, angry, unpredictable, and drunk most nights. One friend told detectives, he kept saying if she left, he'd rather die than see her with someone else. The tragedy of Alicia's story wasn't just in how she died, it was in how much she forgave before she did. She saw a broken man and tried to heal him, even as he chipped away at her peace. She mistook manipulation for love, control for protection, and promises for change. Dr. Caroline Jeffers, a behavioral expert who reviewed the case, later said, "What happened to Alicia isn't rare. It's what happens when empathy meets exploitation." She believed she could love him into being better, but you can't save someone who enjoys being the fire. As Marcus sat at the defense table, silent and stone-faced, the prosecutor played one last piece of evidence, a voicemail Alicia had left a friend the morning of the murder. Her voice was calm but weary. "He's been acting strange again. I'm just tired, girl. I want peace." Those were her last recorded words. And in that courtroom, as her voice filled the silence, even the judge seemed to pause. Because this wasn't just another domestic case. It was a mirror, reflecting how love, when twisted by fear and control, can become the most dangerous weapon of all. The trial of Marcus Reed began on October 2, 2023, under a pale autumn sky. Reporters lined the steps of the DeKalb County Courthouse, their cameras flashing as spectators whispered Alicia's name. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only, every seat taken by those who wanted to understand how a man could destroy the woman who once saved him. Alica Simmons sat in the front row, clutching her daughter's photo in one hand and a tissue in the other. She hadn't spoken publicly since the vigil, but that morning, she whispered a quiet prayer, "Lord, let there be justice." When the judge entered, all eyes turned to Marcus. He looked thinner, older. His once cocky posture had wilted into something hollow. His attorney argued that the murder was a crime of passion, not premeditation, that Marcus lost control in the heat of the moment. But the prosecution had evidence that painted a different picture. They played the recording of his final phone call to a friend before the murder. His voice, filled with rage, echoed through the speakers, "She thinks she can play me? I'll show her I ain't the one." The jurors shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, others stared at Marcus, searching for any sign of remorse. Witness after witness took the stand, friends, co-workers, neighbors. One testified that Alicia had confided just days before her death, saying, "He's getting worse. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells." Another neighbor described hearing her cries that night, saying he still couldn't sleep because of them. The prosecutor's closing argument was simple but devastating. Alica Simmons gave this man her trust, her money, her love, and he repaid her with violence. She didn't die because she stopped loving him. She died because he couldn't stand the thought of her living without him. Angela's tears fell freely as the photos were shown, the apartment floor, the broken lamp, the small teddy bear found near her son's bed. The jury was silent. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood slowly. His voice cracked as he said, "I loved her. I didn't mean for it to go that far." But no one in the courtroom believed him anymore. Love, by that point, had become a word too cheap to matter. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts, first-degree murder and aggravated assault. The judge's gavel came down, firm and final. Marcus Reed was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Angela exhaled for the first time in months. The sound wasn't relief, it was exhaustion, the kind that comes after carrying grief too long. Reporters asked how she felt. She answered softly, "Justice is done, but my daughter's still gone. I just hope her story saves someone else." Outside the courthouse, candles were lit again, but this time, they weren't for mourning. They were for remembrance. For Alicia. For every woman who gave too much, stayed too long, forgave too often. And as the courthouse lights dimmed, the night carried one unspoken truth: love should never have to hurt this much. The courtroom was empty now. The verdict had been read, the cameras had packed up, and the echo of justice faded into the hum of the fluorescent lights. But for Angela Simmons, the silence that followed was louder than anything she had ever known. Her daughter's killer would spend the rest of his life behind bars, yet the seat at her kitchen table would forever remain empty. She often sat there late at night, scrolling through old pictures of Alicia, laughing, holding her son, blowing out candles on a birthday cake. "You had such a beautiful laugh," she whispered one evening, her voice trembling as tears traced the lines of her face. The photos told a story of joy and resilience, but also of pain, the kind that hides behind practiced smiles. Alicia's son now lived with Angela. He was 6, curious and bright, with the same gentle eyes his mother once had. Sometimes he'd ask, "Grandma, is Mommy still sleeping in heaven?" And Angela would nod, holding him close so he wouldn't see the tears she couldn't stop. Each question was a wound reopened, a reminder that the consequences of that night reached far beyond two people in an apartment. They had destroyed generations of love and trust. Across the city, a mural began to take shape on a brick wall near the neighborhood park. It was painted by local artists, a portrait of Alicia with the words, "Her love should have been enough to live." People stopped to take pictures, to leave flowers, to promise themselves they would never ignore the warning signs again. Domestic violence advocates began telling her story at high schools and women's shelters. They spoke about the quiet danger of control, the way abusers twist affection into fear, and how saving someone who doesn't want to change can cost you everything. One speaker said, "Alicia's kindness was her gift, and her curse. But her story is saving lives now." Detective Renee Porter visited the mural one afternoon. She stood quietly, remembering that April night, the cracked phone, the message that read, "Marcus, stop." She whispered under her breath, "I wish he had." For her, every domestic call since had become heavier. She made it her mission to push for faster response protocols for victims in danger, a small change, but one that might save someone like Alicia in the future. As for Marcus, he began serving his sentence in a state penitentiary. Behind those walls, his name was forgotten by most. But the memory of what he did lived on in the faces of those he hurt. He once told his cellmate that he dreamed about Alicia's voice, her saying his name, and then fading into silence. The story of Alica Simmons isn't just about love gone wrong. It's about how fragile hope can be when placed in the wrong hands. It's about how easily compassion can turn into captivity, and how sometimes, the very thing we think we're saving is what ends up destroying us. If you or someone you know is in a toxic or violent relationship, please reach out. You don't have to wait for a bruise, a scream, or a goodbye text to seek help. Because love should never cost you your life. The sun dips low over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the mural of Alica Simmons, her smile frozen in paint, her story now etched into the heart of a city still mourning her. People still stop there, even now. Some light candles. Some bring flowers. Others just stand quietly, staring up at her face, wondering how someone who gave so much could lose everything to love. Her name has become more than a headline. It's a reminder, whispered in classrooms, shelters, and courtrooms. That kindness without boundaries can turn into a cage. Advocates tell her story as both a warning and a tribute. They say her compassion cost her life, but in the end, it might save someone else's. In a Georgia prison miles away, Marcus Reed wakes to silence. No laughter. No music. Just time, endless and heavy. He used to say he couldn't live without her. Now he does, every day, behind concrete walls that echo his regret. Back home, Angela Simmons visits her daughter's grave each Sunday. Her grandson walks beside her, clutching a small toy car. "Mommy liked these," he whispers. She smiles through tears. "Yes, baby. She did." The wind moves through the trees, carrying the faint hum of the city, life continuing, healing slowly, learning. This isn't just her story, the narrator says. It's a lesson, that love should never cost you peace, that control is not care, and silence is never safety. The music softens. The screen fades to black. In memory of Alica Simmons, 1996 to 2023. If you or someone you know is in danger, contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE-7233. Love should never hurt.